Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our Teach It Forward session in 2023. This is our first one. My name is Katie Selstrom. I'm the Director of Customer Experience here at GradeCam, and today I am so excited to hand over the screen, the microphone, and everything else to Crystal, our wonderful panelist. So Crystal is joining us from North Hagerstown High, which is in Washington County Public Schools in Maryland. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her GradeCam journey, how she is using assessments, how her school are using assessments, and how they've kind of redesigned them, thinking about the data that they want to get about student learning. Before we jump in, if you're joining us today and you want to access Crystal's slides, there's a bit.ly link in the top right corner of your screen. And if you have any questions along the way, you can always post them in the chat. Aaron's somewhere on my screen here. He's our other customer success coach. He'll be in the chat with me and answering any questions that you have along the way. Other than that, Crystal, you can take it away.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about data-focused assessment design. And kind of get us started here. I want you to think about this question, what do you agree with the most, and explain why. You kind of think about like why you are agreeing with that person. So we have 4 people here, A, B, C, and D, and kind of a little blurb of what they're thinking about as far as a recent test that was taken, and kind of think about who do you agree with most and why. So I'll give you So in thinking about that, in thinking about that, you want to kind of think about, it kind of depends on what that performance task question is that you are doing and completing. For example, the first one in A, they're talking about gotten 80% on the test, but they missed all the performance task questions. So if you missed all the performance task questions, and that's what the state test is assessing, getting an 80% can lead some misconceptions for the student, for the teacher, thinking that the student, is good to go or not. So that's kind of where you want to kind of think about your assessments and, kind of what is it assessing? What should it be assessing? Is it assessing what you really want it to be assessing? So that when we're getting that score at the end, what does that score actually mean? So really, in any case, you could choose any one of these or right, depending on what the assessment is. To an extent, you could make an argument that in any case, the thinking is on the correct line. And it's going to differ from educator to educator. So why the need for assessment? Why do we need the assessment? So in the world of education, as far as in the state of Maryland, we have accountability like with our teacher evaluations, but the student learning objectives that we need to create every year, which we call our SLO. It gets part of data is reported on the Maryland report card. So kind of district wide overall, we're looking at scores all the time. So it's extremely important in teachers for the school, for the district, to have some sort of measure to be measuring their effectiveness as a school, and have something that's valuable to give them data that they can actually use, which is where GradeCam comes into play. So anytime we're talking about assessments, formative or summative, we want to think about, what's the purpose? What is that score actually meaning? Which kind of goes to our 4 people here to get started this session. What are you looking to get? How's it going to help improve instruction and move your students forward in your classroom? So when you evaluate your assessment, here's just kind of some questions to think about. As far as, a lot of times we think we have a good assessment, but then when we ask ourselves these questions, is it really an assessment that's going to end up giving us what we want to get? Are we going to get data that we can actually use? Or is it just going to be a score of an 80%? Like, what does that correlate to as far as a particular course that you are teaching and the data that you're looking to get from that? So, if your data could produce more than just a cumulative score, what your students mastered and exactly what they mastered per content for the curriculum, how often they missed that, if that question was asked multiple times, what standards are they struggling with, what's their 3 lowest standards. If you could get that information, that's going to be a lot more valuable than, hey, they got an 80% on this test. like our example at the beginning of the presentation. So, and being able to maybe even compare teachers across teachers that teach, maybe you plan together, you're doing the same things. If your students are doing better than my students, how did you do something differently, and kind of be able to look at that and have some constructive conversations to help each other, help students be successful. So it can be very valuable if you can get these things. And the way to get these things is to be able to use GradeCam to do that. So I'm going to kind of talk about how GradeCam has helped kind of shape what we've done here at our school over the years, and be able to give us valuable data to keep moving our students forward versus our platform that we used to have that didn't really give us data, kind of gave us just an overall score at the beginning. So, when we're looking and we're talking about data in education, we're really looking at a cycle that has to happen. Teachers are teaching, they're assessing, they're getting data, they got to analyze that data, and then most often we're creating some sort of an action plan for students to move them forward and keep progressing, or possibly going back to get them to a point where we need them to be, that, and clear up any misconceptions and misunderstandings that they may have. So it's a cycle that we're constantly doing throughout the year in our classrooms across all schools, no matter what subject area that you're teaching. So let's take a look at some data that GradeCam can give you, and kind of see how valuable GradeCam really is as far as getting you that data that you need to make those informative decisions as a teacher as far as how your students are doing. So if you look at these two images here, the top one and the bottom one, and kind of ask yourself the question, which one is more informative to you as a teacher? So the top one, we got 3 different assessments, and you're seeing how many scans, so how many students took it, and then the overall score for that. And at the bottom, you're seeing the same assessments, but you're seeing actual standards and a percent for those standards. So which one's going to give the teacher more information? And as you probably are saying to yourselves, it's going to be the bottom one, where you can look at the actual standards. I can look and see whatever standard that is unaligned, they did really well on. They obviously did better on the Trophic Cascade CER. There was an improvement from a 57 for the SEP, which is what we call Science and Engineering Practices, for this particular exam that was there. They were improving on that for the second exam that they took. So it's going to give you a lot more valuable information than just, hey, they got an 87% overall or a 73% overall. Another way to look at the data is you could look at it by each student. So this is an example of a class list. And again, you have your curriculum standards across the top, and you would have the percentages that each student got. So you can see exactly where that student struggled. Third line down here, the student in the middle got 100% on these 3 standards, but obviously LS24 and LS17, they didn't get correct at all. So somewhere there's a disconnect there, and it tells me where I need to go with the student versus, the student got a 60% on this test, and that's all I know is 60%, but where are they really lacking? This is going to give you a lot more valuable information as an educator to be able to work with that student and get them where they need to go, instead of trying to figure out where should I start with this student. You can get that pinpoint down to exactly what they're misunderstanding and not knowing. Okay, here's another report, another one that I liked a lot, especially towards the end of the course of the year when you're looking at, and for this maybe a state assessment coming up. So like prior to this role, I taught science, and in this case we were looking, and we had our biology HSA state assessment. So I could pull up the kids' 3 lowest standards of all standards that were assessed in GradeCam throughout the year. And then I could really focus on my review with those. And that's where I would start with their 3 lowest standards. And then, depending on how much time we had to review for the assessment, I was able to then, look further into some of the reports. But I would start here with each student, and then I would make my groups from there as far as review groups, because they don't need to review what they already know. They need to focus on what they haven't, continually to be low over all these assessments that have assessed a certain standard of the curriculum. And then for this report, so this would be one also, so if you teach the same level, so you can see here, I had honors biology and biology, so I could compare my honors classes to each other. So are the students overall across my classes, kind of doing the same? Does one class stand out versus another? Did I do something different in that class? or something, with that. So you can compare your classes, you can compare amongst teachers as well. So it's very valuable, again, by standard, where you can kind of look and assess and reflect as a teacher overall, is it being consistent among classes, and give you something to kind of think about and grow in your profession and get better at your teaching. So going back to, again, what we kind of just summed up and looking at these reports, what data analysis should be, it should be what students know. It shouldn't just be a percent or a score. It should be somehow connected to standards or whatever your curriculum is and aligned to that. And, so that you can get information in order to improve, what are students doing well? What do they need to improve? Areas, weaknesses for each assessment. And it's important to vary those assessments so that you can get a wide range. Maybe it's just students are struggling with writing about a particular concept, but not, a data set or something like that. So a lot of times where GradeCam, not just with yourself as an individual teacher, but a lot of PLCs or collaborative planning meetings that happen within districts this data can be used and gives you a purpose kind of for the meeting and make it more productive and focused and actually, kind of problem solving. If my students, like I said, if I'm planning with a colleague and we're planning a certain, lesson and my students just bomb this one standard and, my colleague, her kids did really well, you can have kind of conversations and reflect on that. What did you do? Even though you plan the same, each teacher's has their own kind of craft as far as how they're going to do things. So maybe she did something, or maybe she changed it some way, but then that helps me as a teacher as well. It gives me an idea what I can go back and do or work with, or maybe even like work together to, hey, I'm going to, we'll offer this after school tutoring for this group. And, I'll take this group of kids that did low on this standards with our classes, if you're teaching the same subject and content area. So, it creates a bunch of possibilities when you have data that you can actually use and talk about, and it gives you something to go from, and you're not compiling that all on your own with a couple clicks of the button of GradeCam. You can get that very valuable information very quickly, which is what I really love about GradeCam and using it over the years. So again, this would be an example of a science, like I said, I taught science. So this would be an example of a PLC and what we were asked to do within that PLC. And if you kind of like quickly look through here, as far as the questions and kind of asking when we're bringing our assessment tool and aligned with our content standards and transfer goals, it was a lot easier to be able to accomplish this with the data and using GradeCam than initially teachers who weren't using GradeCam within my department. They had to go back in their grade book and they had to find that particular assessment. And then they had to try to, do, kind of tabulate some data on their own within that meeting. And it just, obviously with my data and I had printed out and highlighted, I was ready to go. They spent most of their time, doing that. So it's very valuable to be able to accomplish something like this if you have data that, you can actually get results, and you can look for patterns and areas of growth and weaknesses and be able to group your kids and spend your time doing that versus tabulating the data from scores or your grade book that you have. And then here's another example of kind of, again, having all of the standards at the end of a particular course or year, where you can see each student and list by standards. So what I would do, kind of going back to that one slide earlier, is I would you can export any reports into Excel, and then you can manipulate that or use it however you want. So I would combine them, and then I would kind of manipulate those a little bit myself in order to make my groups. So it's very easy to, like I said, to attach standards to the assessments and in the key that you're creating within GradeCam, and then be able to get that values or that valuable data. So you want to, obviously use the standard attaching, because that's going to give you, and you can even create your own customized standards like the SEP. That was something that was kind of for our county that we had, science and engineering practices, or CCC, which was cross-cutting concepts. So you can add your own as well as your state standards in there that be able to get, customize the data if you want to even break it down further. And then obviously, kind of some of the questions I've kind of talked about, you can do any of these questions, or just an example, guiding questions to be able to guide your PLC meetings if you have that usable data, which makes it very, very valuable. And then kind of the same thing I already talked about, just to kind of highlight for you and recap, you can possible outcomes of the PLC. Then, like I said, you can regroup kids. You can maybe even, maybe there's some you're going to want to retake the assignment. You want to reteach and then you're going to retake it. Just depending on what it is that you're looking at, you have multiple avenues to kind of go if you have data that you can work with and make those informed decisions moving forward. How are we doing, Katie? Any questions? Are we all good?
Yeah, we're doing great. I was going to let you get through a couple more slides and then pop up a couple questions that were coming up. So go ahead. You're almost there. And then I'll pause when we get to that gradient slide for you.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. So to kind of just overall kind of recap, obtaining valuable feedback for teachers and students, I've been talking a lot about the teacher part of it, but the student of getting instant feedback. You can give them feedback, you can give them more kind of informed feedback and show, a lot of times the students, going back to that first slide that we opened up with, if students think they got an 80%, they might, I'm great, I'm good to go. But if they don't realize that, this standard here, and that's kind of, what makes up the state assessment is 50% of that particular, maybe critical thinking questions or whatever that question is, modeling and reasoning, that's going to be a problem for them. So when you can have that conversation with students that, look, yeah, you had an 80%, that's great, but we're lacking right here. We need to bring you up to speed on that. So it's like assessment for learning instead of just of learning. Like students oftentimes are used to getting that score and then moving on. But if you're, assessing for learning, reteaching, kind of working with them, students kind of like to have that feedback, and it kind of makes them feel like they're taking part of that process, to be able to get that. So it's just kind of a phrase I've come up more like a growth mindset, where instead of just this final score, move on, you're doing it throughout, and it kind of creates that culture within your classroom. So kind of what I've kind of talked about, this is a platform that our county used to have, actually still has, and we've also just kind of coupled it with GradeCam, and you can kind of see without zooming in, but basically you got a color, green, red, or orange, or you got a status bar. So that was it. You knew majority of the kids, if you had all red for a standard, they were lacking that, but you didn't have specific students, you didn't have specific classes. So it was data to kind of start to look at. But then if you move to this slide for our English teachers ended up obviously being a lot more valuable. They had students that they could look at specifically. They could see what that student got on that particular standard instead of a green and yellow kind of toggle bar, green and red toggle bar. So by able to look at the standards and by student is the biggest thing that GradeCam allowed us to do, and give us, more valuable, and our scores increased because of that, versus kind of just clumping all basically getting a mean for our classes and having to make decisions from there. So this was obviously more valuable to us.
Awesome, Crystal. Thank you so much. There's kind of a reoccurring theme in what you've been talking about, a lot of references to saving time. You talked about teachers in your teams having to calculate data on the fly and how time consuming that is. And in the meantime, you're just clicking around and showing the data. So huge time saver there. It's great to hear. I know I'll bring that back to our developers. They love hearing that they're saving teachers time. And then kind of another theme you talked about was just focus. So with the limited time that you have, being able to know where to target your review session for, where to have goal setting conversations with students all around standards, instead of just kind of the fire hose method that we often try, like, I'm just going to review these 12 things and hope, kids get it. It sounds like you've saved a lot of time in that way too. What I was wondering is, how did you get to this point? So you talked about PLCs and having these really rich discussions about data. Were you guys always there, or have some teams been the champions of that and then they brought the others along? Could you talk about, for people that aren't in the same spot you are, how did you get there?
So a lot of it started, and it kind of depended on if you were obviously in one of those state assessments. So the 4 core assessment areas were always constantly, we're having meetings with data, and it's like you would get maybe a Lexile score. And it was like, how do you like, okay, is this going to predict, whether they can do this or that? So we kept like talking, and that platform that I showed you, we kept saying to the candidate, like, that data is not usable. Like, yeah, it shows me that 67% of my class got it or didn't get it, but it didn't tell me any specifics, like what questions. So like one thing with Gradient, you can use the item analysis, and you can look at question by question, and that's further in the presentation if you look at some of the extra slides that I included in there with the item analysis. So it kind of just started, and we had this flow that came along, the student learning objective, where we had to pick an area. Each teacher has to pick an area, and they have to use baseline data and for evidence, like whether they're trying to look at writing, maybe it's a curriculum. So like a lot of times in science, we did the claim, evidence, and reasonings, what we call CERs. So we were kind of having this conversation where we needed some sort of program to give us data versus me going through all of my 120 kids and making my own Excel spreadsheet and documenting it. And then, so one of our, actually our principal ended up attending a conference and brought this back and was like, hey, try this out. I want to know what you think. And of course I was sold like instantly, being in science and data. And I was like, yes. And so he's like, tell me what it can do. Like, tell me how we can use this with our PLCs and whatever. So that's kind of how it started. We just started kind of using multiple choice. And then like, it ended up going to where I was like, I wanted to do this. I need to do this. How can I get it to grade CERs? How can I get it to do this? So I mean, sometimes I use it as just recording from a rubric. Like I make a key in GradeCam from the rubric aspect, where it's not really, I'm not even scanning anything or giving kids anything. I'm grading something, but I'm using it to track, kind of like my grade book that then I can check. So it kind of came from that, like the need that we needed from our principal in the direction we were going. And he kind of happened to stumble on it, and we kind of were like, and then we kind of troubleshooted it, and then we just kept getting more staff involved and showing them. Once you could show them the data you could get and the time they would save, because I was spending hours doing my slow data prior. Then
Right.
Now it's 2 clicks and here's my data and I upload it. Like,
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing.
yeah.
And it sounds like as you got into it, you wanted to do more and more once you realized what it could do, the slicing and dicing and data and tracking. Would
really
you mind?
Versatile. It really is versatile with everything that you can, like I said, a lot of you think it's multiple choice, but it really doesn't need to be multiple choice. It can be anything. Our math uses it, science uses it, foreign language, like everyone, uses it to get that data and be able, like I said, the biggest thing has been like everyone has to do a slow. So, whether you're an assessed area or not, for a state assessment where you're looking at doing those review sessions or not, everyone has a individual slow that you need to try to work on a target. So it gives data that you can track throughout the year and show growth for your kids.
Yeah, that's great. I know further in the slide deck, we have more slides of examples. I was wondering if we could hop to, I believe you have some slides that show some pictures of different assessments you made. Let's see, I think it's like slide, I want to say like 31 or so.
Oops.
Oh, no worries.
Wrong one.
So many tabs.
Too many tabs. I got too many. What happened to my, oops.
Because I know, like you mentioned, I'll just chat a little bit. You started off with multiple choice, which is actually really common for most folks that use GradeCam. They build a key, multiple choice, get going, get the data, and then kind of like you said, start building different types of answer keys to collect the data differently.
Right. Hold on one
second. I can also pull it up too if you want. I have it on
if you
mine.
want to. Yeah, I think I don't know what happened.
No worries. No worries at all. Let me grab mine. Here we go. Just ignore my messy desktop here.
There we go. Yeah.
So I think this is one of your assignments. Could you just talk us through what this is?
So this is the portal, which is how GradeCam Gradient has evolved. So this is where you can put it electronically onto and push it out to your students electronically, so you don't have a paper copy or anything here. So the bottom image, is something that I created. And like you can see where there, I have a diagram, I have one, 1, 2 on there, as far as questions and what they're asking or being asked with that. So you can create that, and then you can upload it, or you save it as a PDF, and then you can upload it into Gradient, where you can then actually push it out and see it. So it opens kind of like the test and then the bubble sheet, and you can kind of see the bubble sheet. You can customize, so you can see like A through E for 1 through 4. Questions 5 through 8 have 1 through 6 where they're filling in. So if you have only 4 answer choices or 3 answer choices, so you can make it customizable for whatever your assessment is, and it keeps their progress as they go. So as they click an answer, like 1 will light up, 2 will light up, and they can resize those windows. They can zoom in with that. And then, so that would just be kind of like similar to like a multiple choice, simple, maybe an exit ticket, maybe a quiz to kind of check in the middle of a unit. And then the top diagram is actually the CER that I was referring to for the slow, where students would type in there and put their response. And, if you wanted them, some students like to type it in a document. Sometimes I allow them to kind of do their pre-write in a document, and then copy paste, put it here, and they can add to it and then turn it in here, so that I have it and I can give them feedback, and I can attach that to a standard, as well as they have their original if they want to revise it.
That's great. And then I think this was another example of what it looks like from the teacher perspective, right? So after they've submitted it on the portal, you can go into Gradient, grade by question.
Yep. So this is what you would see when you're grading a student scan, and then you can grade it based on, so like for here, this is a rubric. So question 4 is on a 4-point rubric, question 5 is 9-point, and 6. So you can see I have feedback typed in there, and you can type as much feedback as you want there with the bubble. So, and it's there, they can see it when they log back in, and then you can kind of grade it, and it will automatically calculate their points from there.
That's great. And I'm guessing because of what you showed us earlier, all of those have already been aligned to standards. So then those rubric values would tell you kind of mastery on those standards as well.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool. So this is, it looks like you're doing performance-based assessments. These labels mean something to you.
Yes. Yeah. So CERs, the claim, evidence, and reasoning. Debate-based questions are social studies, as well as EBOS, evidence-based, and then FRQ.
It's okay.
I don't remember FRQ.
Yeah.
Free response questions. Sorry. Yeah. Free response questions. Yeah. So those are different and those are across all of our subjects. So they do them. It's not just science or math. So those were just there just to kind of show a wide range of subjects using them.
Great. And then this looks like one of your rubrics that you're using. So those point values that you were showing us earlier, they are referencing this document.
Correct. And I would have that in front of me, like at my computer, and then I would just be clicking because they would have all their work there, and I can see it. And then they know that this aligns to those 1, 2, 3. So I have like the questions 1, evidence 2. So that's how my questions would be set up in Gradient. And then they would know that aligns too, because I'd have like this rubric posted in Google Classroom. So they know.
Oh, great. So they see the kind of rubric ahead of time. And so this is some screenshots of the answer key you've made in Gradient, and then what it looks like for a student to answer if they're doing it online, and then what it would look like from a form if someone was bubbling it in.
Yep, correct.
Great. So it's like all those different options. So do some of your teachers use paper and some use online? Are you guys doing a mix?
Yeah, we do a mix. Yep. Some teachers still like paper. Some of the lower level like paper. If you have a class that has an issue of not bringing their devices charged, and or if they don't bring it, you can have a couple, or you can easily quickly print the paper, and you can do a combination of both.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then this looks like similar. So you have your answer key over here on the left, and then on the right, what that would look like if you're printing it out on a form.
Correct. So that was before the portal happened, before the portal they could, or if you didn't want, they could write, and it will, and that's the other thing that I haven't touched on, it can read their handwriting. So when they write on here and you scan it, it will come up and you'll see their handwriting, and it will be there. So yeah, that was another kind of variation of playing around with it and what worked best.
That's great. Well, I think we have a lot of, and this is another example, we have a lot of other examples for folks. Oh, and here's one if you had scanned versus online. So this is a great picture of that. So folks can go back to your slide deck and look at other pictures of the reports that you're using and how the data looks when it's live. I know you've blurred out student information, so we're protecting all of that.
Right.
I'll go ahead and stop sharing for now. And if anyone has questions, they can stay on. But I wanted to thank you, Crystal, so much for sharing all of this awesomeness. It sounds like the team has come such a long way to looking at data and designing assessments. So hats off to you and the team.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, it's been very valuable. It's awesome.
So
it's
cool.
It's the best teacher's best friend, I think. But
nice. Okay, well, I'll stop recording, and folks that want to can stay on, and we can then go through any of the other slides or answer any questions that come up.